Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week's episode is number 86. And this week on the podcast, we have Justin Smith join us to talk about all things commercial real estate investing. Justin is a broker, investor, representative. He does a lot of things in the industrial commercial real estate space in Southern California and joins us to talk about what investing in commercial real estate is like as an asset class and what business owners who are considering buying buildings for their own businesses to occupy need to think about, both prior to day one, from day one to the day that the business no longer occupies the building, and then thereafter, when the owner might want to sell the building, swap it into a larger building, liquidate entirely. Justin joins us and is a wealth of knowledge on this topic, which is of particular interest to a lot of our clients who are interested in buying buildings for their own businesses. So we had a great discussion today. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody. Real quick before we jump into today's episode, I have been advised by my attorneys to remind you all that none of what you might hear in today or any other episode of Grow Money Business is financial, investing, tax, legal, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and deploy on your own terms. And before you take any actions on what we might cover in the show, I really encourage you to consult with your accountant, attorney, or financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner and think that you might need one, be sure to check out threeoakswealth.com to learn more about my firm's planning, advice, and investment services. Justin Smith, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Grant. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on the show. This is a show about financial planning for business owners predominantly, and commercial real estate is something that comes up with some regularity, I would say. Either people are interested in investing in commercial real estate, they're interested in buying buildings, which their own businesses will later operate out of, some combination of the two. And just commercial real estate investing as an asset class is something that's particularly interesting to me because it's interesting to a lot of my clients. So I'm really excited to have you on and maybe have you share a little bit of your infinite wisdom on the asset class and the industry.
I'm happy to help. And for me, by way of background, I'm with Lee and Associates. I've been here for 17 years. I focus primarily on industrial property, although I have some experience, probably 50 or 60 transaction experience with office buildings and medical office buildings and triple net investments. It's like single tenant net lease investments to the extent that's helpful. And then I practice what I preach. So I've purchased investment property, single family rentals. I've pitched into office buildings as a limited partner. I own some industrial property, just my family, and then am investing in other industrial properties with other general partners and limited partners. So to the extent that's helpful, I'm happy to kind of elaborate or walk through any examples or if that's helpful.
That would be great. So you've been doing it for a while, and it sounds like you have plenty of deals under your belt to draw some experience from. How did you get started initially? So you've been doing it for 17 years, you said. How did you get into it?
Yeah, we usually get roped into it by a friend or family member in real estate, right? That's usually something where you know somebody and they say, come on over. For me, it's my sister. I'm one of 5 kids, and one of my sisters was a 1031 exchange accommodator at the time. And so if you own a commercial property or any income property and you go to sell that property and you're trying to defer your capital gains tax and take what proceeds you have made from your investments and roll them into a larger property, a 1031 exchange accommodator is the person that's responsible for holding the proceeds from one investment to the other so that you abide by all of the tax rules so that you can defer those capital gains. So when exchange accommodators, clients are brokers, commercial real estate brokers. So my sister at the time knew all the brokers in the land in Southern California. And that's right when her baby brother was coming out of undergraduate university and looking for a job. So it was pretty easy to get connected up and go on a round of interviews. And it was one of those where one of the first 2 or 3 introductions was someone that I gelled with. And I never looked back and kind of jumped headfirst. And that's with the same firm that I'm with today, same office.
So your first job out of school is the same firm, same industry, same everything that you're in currently. You've been doing the same thing for 17 years. That's astounding that you found such a good fit right off the bat.
Yeah, and no plans to go anywhere anytime soon. And I feel fortunate that I stumbled into a firm that has a great balance of being nimble enough and flexible enough where you can feel like you're very entrepreneurial in your business and what kind of book of business you want to generate. But big enough where we're national, we have great leadership, and you have all the main resources you would need to be successful. So I feel like had I stumbled into one of the top 4 or with a really small boutique firm, I could definitely see having moved around, but I just was very fortunate that where I landed, we were right on the cusp of major growth. So I've been able to experience that, and it's just been a great fit.
Wow. So how do you describe your role? And I think all of our listeners are probably very familiar with residential-based realtors who are helping their clients buy and sell homes predominantly. And then in the commercial space, you have some professionals who focus on representing tenants, some who represent owners, some focus on investment properties. Where do you fit in this space?
Yeah, industrial is the asset class that I focus on. And I look at it just as being an advisor, right? So an advisor to business owners and to investors. And so if you have the business owner and the investor are 2 sides of the table, right, where you may have a landlord and a tenant, I've found with industrial, brokers are more likely to represent tenants and investors, like with regularity, where it's very infrequent, where they'll just only be industrial tenant focus or industrial landlord focus. And that changes by geography. So I'm in Southern California, where we're in the nation's largest market between Los Angeles County, Orange County, and the Inland Empire. That's almost 1 billion square feet of industrial property. And so I found in a big market, you're exposed to so many different types of industrial requirements and clients that you really are best served by working both sides. And I've found, especially when you go to invest in property, it gives you a more intimate understanding of what it's like to be one or the other and how an agreement can come together that's good for both parties. So I found that really has held me in good stead by knowing both sides very well.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a lot of helpful context when you're going through the negotiations and the deal structuring and really all the above, I suspect. So,
Yeah.
so why don't we jump in, or why don't we start with talking a little bit about owner-occupied spaces, and in my role in helping business owners grow, preserve wealth, build their business in a way that aligns with their values and family, and really squeezing the most juice out of their assets possible as possible. This concept of investing in a building that your business is going to reside in is just really appealing from a tax standpoint. If the business has to reside somewhere and pay rent somewhere, it may as well be to yourself and your family. And the financing side of it becomes a lot more favorable when you buy a building and your business occupies it, right? So how do you see that in your space? When somebody comes to you, they say, "Hey, I'm looking at buying a building because I want to own where my business sits." Where do you start?
Yeah, I love it. And I agree 100%. And what I have found is with a lot of companies, it depends on what market they do business. So there's a private company that I work with that has locations in 25 states. And it depends on which state we're in on whether we own or we lease. That's just one how the chips have fallen for that company. And a lot of it has to do with the price of real estate, right? And how it relates to the value if you purchase it or the lease rate. And then labor and transportation, and then just the company's longevity in that market. But when people want to own, I've found they usually start with the SBA. And you don't have to. All of the major banks are interested and have an appetite for industrial properties and for business owners to purchase industrial properties. But the majority of people start with the SBA because you have favorable down payment. So for the SBA, it's a 10% down payment, as opposed to 20 to 25% for like Chase Bank or Wells Fargo. And then the SBA also has oftentimes longer amortization, which results in lower monthly payments. And then they'll finance equipment, so along with your property loan. So if you're expanding from one building to another and you're going from leasing to owning, that's a double expense that you have at that moment in time. So they can help with equipment purchases, whether it's manufacturing equipment or whether it's racking or forklifts and material handling equipment. So I find that's the most likely first step. And then when they go and do that, how do you go get an SBA loan? So the SBA is set up so that they'll have different organizations in different counties that represent their interests. And sometimes they'll be called development banks or development corporations. And then the way an SBA loan works is if purchase was for $1 million and you're putting your 10% down, the SBA finances 40% of the purchase of the building. And then a conventional bank partners with them and then provides the 50% loan to make the total for 100. So if you are a conventional bank, your exposure is only 50% loan to value, and it's the government that is in the higher risk position. So that's government sponsored financing that's helping make that possible for business owners. And then that's the most common path. So I found that's extremely helpful. It's relevant in almost every state and every county. And then from that point on, then a lot of people will then go with conventional banks as they continue to grow from there, because the SBA does have a limit in the size of loans that they will process for business owners. And it's usually still large, like tens of millions of dollars large, 10 to 18 million, depending on where you're at. So that's big enough to get most people through their first 1, 2, or 3 buildings. But if you go up from there, then you end up with a conventional bank or some kind of business bank.
Gotcha. Now, so if you're trying to finance equipment purchases and so forth too, are those purchases wrapped into the same SBA loan as the building purchase, or will the SBA accommodate lending on top of the building purchase through a separate loan?
I think it's the latter.
Separate loan.
Yeah, and you'll find largely because the payback period of time is going to be shorter. So the amortization is going to be shorter, where you wouldn't want to pay for your forklift for 25 years, right? And the amount of interest you would pay on that equipment. Same goes for tenant improvements as well. So if you need to construct additional rooms that are climate controlled, or for a lab, or for food production, air conditioning units, break rooms, any of that kind of stuff, the same type of logic applies there.
Sure. So you're leaning on SBA backed lending, at least for your first couple of purchases. Do you find that businesses going this route are typically, do you find that the business is the entity buying the building, or is it the ownership, or how are those structured? Who is actually doing the purchasing?
Yeah, it's funny. One would think everyone would know this, but I've found few do until you've walked the path on it. And you would think you would just be having it in the company name because you'd be working through the SBA and they're lending it to your business. But I have found that people want to hold title in a separate entity. They want their own separate asset protection, and they want to separate the business from the building to the extent that that's feasible. So I found most end up having a separate entity that they set up for the property. And that's pretty common. And I feel like another reason why you would do that is further down the road, if you ever were to sell your business, or if you were ever to exchange it and move the business to another building and then sell that property and roll that property and turn it into an investment property, it would need to be a different entity. And that's not really the main purpose of the SBA, right? So they don't structure these loans for you to become a real estate investor. But I find those who have a long-term horizon, that oftentimes happens. And it can be 10 years and they've refinanced out of that loan. But separate is how the majority of people handle that.
Does the SBA care whether it's the business or the individual?
I think they definitely care in the sense that they want all incentives and interests to be aligned. Mm-hmm. And so I think one thing that makes the difference is the majority owner of the business. Let's say the CEO is 100% owner of the business or is a majority owner. Are they personally guaranteeing the loan? And so if they're personally guaranteeing the loan, I think that is the alignment of interest there that the SBA is going to want to see. That's going to lessen the amount of difference or in having two separate entities for the business and for the building.
Right. Almost every single time I've been through this with a client or evaluated opportunities, it makes more sense for the individual to own it as opposed to the business. And for all the same reasons you just mapped out. But in terms of long-term wealth building, it's just so handy when you're ready to exit your business. If you decide to sell, you still own the building. Now you pull income off of the building. You have an income stream after you've just sold the business and given up that income stream. And your tenant is a business that you built and know probably better than the person now running it. And it's just a very, very powerful way to ring the bell on a lot of long-term tax advantages while producing an income stream way down the line.
And to piggyback off of that, I find it's an interesting conversation with business owners of how long of a lease should they sign with their own company when they're contemplating selling their business and keeping the building. And on one hand, you would think that a potential acquirer would want to have maximum flexibility, where if they needed to take that business and consolidate it into one of their big buildings somewhere else, they could. And on another hand, some acquirers want to know that the business has a long-term right to operate there without any surprise expenses or having a need to relocate when they're unprepared for it or when they haven't built up enough capital for it. So I find there's a lot of opinions there, and there's a lot of strategy that will take place of how to structure that. And is it 1 year to 10 years? 1 year, I even see it as 15 years. And that is something that everybody has to think through. How does that align with their interests? How does that align with their goals? And how are acquirers looking at that? Is that an asset or is that a liability for them? And I find everyone looks at that a little different.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. So now let's say that you're a business owner, you just purchased this building, moved your business into it. What kind of things do you need to be thinking about in terms of ongoing operations and maintenance of the building that you're in, knowing that you're the only occupant? Do you see any mistakes that tenants, business owners are making on a common basis? And I can totally see that the strategy behind the term of the lease that you're negotiating between yourself and your business is relevant. What else? What do investors and business owners need to be thinking about?
Yeah, when you go from one building you lease to another building that you're going to lease, let's say you go from 20,000 feet to 40,000 feet, the landlord is building out the space for you in the majority of instances, and they're doing so when the property is vacant. They're doing so with their own money. You'll come in and move in once it's ready. And then depending on whether it's multi-tenant, like part of a business park, or whether it's a single freestanding building, the landlord or your company will take care of the common area maintenance. So that's everything that's on the outside of the building, the insurance, and the payment of property taxes. So when you go from a tenant to owning your own building, you will then need to most likely go through a construction project where you're fitting out the building for you. So that might mean that if you're lucky, paint and carpet in 7 days, right? And if you're like most people, you're changing the reception area, the conference rooms, the break rooms, the orientation, how big they are, or how many people you're looking to accommodate within the office space itself. And if you're doing polished concrete, exposed ceilings, or if you have a traditional drop ceiling office, and then even into the warehouse, if you're upgrading power, that's expensive and there's a long lead time with the utility providers. And if you need to change anything when it comes to the docks and the loading areas, all of that is construction that you need to do on your own with a contractor that may be funded by the SBA, that will have some oversight where they'll want to ensure that everything's done to code and is permitted and is inspected before they'll fund progress payments to a contractor. So a lot of that comes down to not only managing some construction, but managing a timeline from when am I out of my current building and when does the landlord need to get their new tenant in, to when your construction is done and when you can move in. And if you even need some overlap so that your operation, your ability to serve your customers isn't compromised and is a smooth experience where they're unaware or unaffected by that move. That's a big challenge for a lot of people that everybody goes through. And that's to get to day one. And then after day one, right, you now are in charge of property tax payments. You're in charge of insurance. So that's building insurance in addition to your general liability and workers' comp insurance. And then you are now in charge of all exterior maintenance, interior maintenance for that matter too. So big ticket items are the roof. How long has it been there? What condition is it in? Is there a warranty? Do you have to maintain it in a way to keep the warranty, to stay within like the confines of the warranty to make sure it's still valid? And then replacement and repairs. That's a big ticket item that most will use their roofer and whoever installed it. Where others, as they start to gain in scale, they'll have a facilities manager or one of their operations guys, and they'll use internal employees to maintain things like the roof or inside the building or anything on the outside. So once you start getting into managing and maintaining the property, it's helpful sometimes to use a building inspector on the purchase. And sometimes with your inspector, you can upgrade the inspection that they are doing that will then give you useful lives for all of the building systems so that you can start to build your own internal schedule so that you know when you need to re-slurry the parking lot and when you really need to scrape it down and put a new coat of asphalt on it. Or with the roof, if you're going to need to budget for a roof, roofs are terribly expensive anyways, and they're 30 to 40% more expensive now with roofing materials. Now, it's not as if Amazon is buying every roof for every warehouse that's causing a shortage, but roof expenses have gone up quite a bit. So one is just knowing when you're going to need to do it. Another is these are capital expenses and investments you now have to put into your building that you'll need to budget for and make sure you have working capital available, or that you've talked with the SBA in advance and have something set up to help take care of that. I'd say those are the first couple of items that you come across and that you need to get set up so that once you're in it and you own it and you're making your normal payments and time goes by, you're going to start to have to deal with these things. So that's a good way to be set up and have estimated timeline and useful life for every component piece of the building that you can then work with people like yourself and internally to just think through, how am I going to fund this and who is going to help me? Can I do it internally, or do I need to hire people or a service, or have a maintenance service contract for regular maintenance?
Right, right. So what I hear you saying is that the level that you're focusing on project management when you make this change is just astronomically larger. Because to get to day one, as you put it, you have the retrofitting of the new space, you have the move. Do you need overlap? What's the timing of it? What's the communication with the landlord of your existing space? And then after day one, now you've got to plan out cash flow around these ongoing maintenance items that will inevitably come up over time. I like your suggestion of paying up for a more robust inspection up front so that you have some kind of estimate of useful life across the board. Seems like a pretty logical way to go about it.
Yeah, I think the reason inspectors started providing those was a lot of the investors in the investment community, as they're trying to come up with their own CapEx budgets and risk mitigation. That's something that every investor looks at. So I feel like for the business owner, that's something they benefit, that that's now readily available for them, that they can utilize, that ordinarily they would just look at, is everything working? Do I need a credit or some kind of request for repairs? And taking it one step further is a good baseline.
So let's fast forward chronologically a little bit then through maybe the life cycle of this whole thing. We're past day one. We've been occupying the space for a long time. Now let's say that it's time to either close the business or sell the building, or potentially upgrade, buy a second building that you will then occupy. What do you see? What do business owners and businesses in general need to think about when they're making that transition from selling the current building and then either closing up shop, selling the business, or purchasing that next larger building? What's that look like?
Yeah, it's really usually comes down to capacity and like liquidity, right? Or capital. So if you're short on capital, I found some will do a sale leaseback. And that's the opposite of what we just talked about, right? So that would be a company that you own the company, you own the building, and that's the building you do business out of. And if you are in debt and trying to pay down debts, or if you're looking to raise capital internally to fund future acquisitions, you can sell the building, stay in it, and sign a lease with a new landlord or a new investor. And then you don't have to move. You continue with the same amount of capacity that you have to hold inventory and to fulfill orders for customers. But then you now have 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 million that you can then deploy to build the business. I find that's one change, like in trajectory, that some owners take. Capacity, right? That's I'm out of space. Usually that's when you start seeing product where they take it out of the racking and they have to start shuffling around inventory within the building. So if you think of your garage is filled with bikes and storage and things from your kids' toys they don't use anymore and workout equipment, and it starts getting so full you got to take stuff out to find other things. It's not too different for a warehouse, but there's our pallets of product. So you'll find at first they'll store it on the ground, then they'll store it in the staging areas, which is the space between the roll-up door and the racking. Then they'll start staging outside the building because inside is too cluttered. So for us as brokers, when we drive by a building and we see that happening outside, that's a telltale sign for us to know this person has a capacity problem. And so when you have that, you kind of come across this chicken or egg situation where, do you buy the next building before selling the one? Or do you start marketing yours for sale before you go out to go find your next building? And so there's no perfect way to do that, right? That is its own challenge and balancing act for how to do that. And I find usually you need to get very smart on what you have to sell before you can start to assess what there is to buy, just because most oftentimes business owners will be taking the equity that they've built up, no different from when you trade up houses to a bigger house. So knowing what you have to sell before going out there to figure out what it is you will buy is a natural first step. But you do have to size up the market for what you buy just so that you know that it can be done. You'll want to talk with your SBA again to find out, hey, can I afford to buy the second one and still hold the first one or not? And then if you're going to retire or sell the business, right? That's not liquidity or capacity. That's just timeline, right? You're retiring. It's your age. It's your lifestyle. And I find that all has to do with, are you doing an ESOP where you have this employee stock ownership where you're selling the business to employees? And or are you selling to a private equity firm? We'll see that a lot with manufacturers. And very rarely do I find that people will sell the business in the building, because I find that it's hard enough to find the right fit for how you value the business and how you value the building. That most oftentimes people sell the business, they hold on to the building. And I find it's practical from a valuation standpoint, but it's also practical from a retirement standpoint, right? If you're looking to go from active income to passive income. And so that's sometimes thinking through your loan and what loan you have on the property when you're going through that will also determine whether you're allowed to have it be an investor loan where if you purchased it, if you got an SBA loan on a new building, you have to occupy 51% of it. It's not built to be an investor. So sometimes looking at your loan and how much is left on it, or how you're going to deal with that, or how your bank feels about that, I'd say that's kind of a next first step for people that are looking to retire before they make any moves or get too far down the road.
Sure. Yeah, the sale leaseback for businesses who are going to continue operating makes a lot of sense. That's a really common thing, at least in the residential space. In the residential space, another common maneuver when you're legging up from one house into the next house is you put in an offer to buy the next house that's contingent on you being able to sell the current house. Sounds like in the commercial real estate game, that's not that common. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't fly in the sense that sellers won't agree to that. And I feel like they almost never did. And I think everyone's looking for surety of close. And in the past 5 years and in our immediate future, e-commerce as an industry or as a change in how industrial people do business and a lot of businesses has made it such that there's so much demand and so little new supply that if anything, it's going more the other way where if you need a bank loan, you may be competing against people who don't need a bank loan. And so you don't really have a choice in that matter. And it's making it a little more challenging if you then have to commit to selling before you can have a firm commitment on where you're going to move to. And that's the last thing you want is uncertainty with your business where you're like, I've got 100 employees, I've got all these machines and all these people counting on me and all these customers. And I've got to make one commitment that's ending my ability to stay in a building that is, without that, there's no business. So there can be flexibility where you do lease back for a period of time until you find what you're going to buy. But even that is a concession to buyers, that buyers have their own problems. They have their own timing considerations. And so that's if you are buying a building for your business and the seller says, I got to stay in it for a couple of months, then you are starting to pay on your new building. You're not able to do your construction to fit it out. And now you're dealing with your own part of this chain. So that's right. That part is challenging, and it definitely takes a lot of thought process and a lot of hard work and sometimes a good fortune to have all those moving pieces line up at the right time.
Right. So let's take this from an investment standpoint then. Let's put aside the owner occupied, my business is going to occupy the building that I'm going to buy component of this. Just for general investment purposes, what do you look for in a potential property or building or anything that would make it an attractive investment for your portfolio?
Yeah, so at Lee, we do a good job of in our DNA knowing that we're building a skill set and that real estate brokers, our retirement, we're in charge of our own success. So that's it. We have to be smart in our own investments. So we find that a lot of people will invest in whatever property type that they're specialists in. So that allows you to be intimately familiar with all of the nuances and to be able to proactively manage your investments. And so for me, I look for industrial properties, and everybody generally will look in from the sense of cash flow, right? What's your cap rate going in, or what's your yield? Or they'll look for value add, which would be there's a problem with the property. It's either vacant, needs lease up, or needs construction, and there's some profit in there if you're able to identify it and fix it or improve upon it. And then there's coupon clippers or core deals, which is a building that's already clean, it's already leased, it has term, and it has credit to it. And you're just looking more to protect your capital than you are to earn higher returns. And so everybody comes down at a different point on that spectrum based on how old they are, how much they have to invest, and what their strategy is. If this is all of their capital and all their investment, or if this is one bucket that's not their fixed income and it's not their equity portfolio, everybody will have a different take on that. So sometimes it's part of a tax strategy to have property and to be able to have depreciation. For me, I've followed job growth and population growth. And so that's led me to own properties in Austin, Texas and Dallas, Texas. And that's been for the last 10 years. And so that's maybe not unique to hear of California people doing stuff in Texas, right? That's like we hear a ton of people moving out of state, but usually that's for lower cost of living or for increased job growth, where I've found there are more industrial properties at an entry-level price, call it $1 million to $2 million, that are concrete tilt-up construction. That's a great starter's market to look in. And there I found the cash flow yields are higher. So they have all compressed, but I've looked at a deal today that's 7% going in on existing cash flow, and that's without any loan. So that's not without any leverage, right? So in real estate, most people will finance those at 60% loan to value with a 4% loan that's over 5 to 10 years. Usually 10 years is your maturity date until you have to refinance, but then it's amortized over 20, 25, or 30 years. So you'll have amortization like you would on a 30-year fixed home loan, but you'll have to refinance it every 10 years. And that can make your 7% turn into 9%, give or take. And so one that I purchased 5 years ago was 8.8% going in before financing. And so that's an example of a very similar property with the yields going down almost commensurate with interest rates going down. So you still can use financing to increase your yield. But if you were an all cash investor, you would go from making 8.8% on your money pre-tax to making 7% on your money. And then it's not fixed in the sense that that 7% or 8.8% is based on year one rents. So your ability to manage these investments successfully would be your ability to grow rents in year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And how you grow rents depends on whether you can manage it better, you can lease it better, you can make the space more attractive, you can make the project more attractive, or in our sense, the e-commerce has made all leases go up more just by the sheer amount of demand. So for me, that would tell you that I'm more focused on cash flow and value add. And then people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are selling their businesses, they usually will look more from a capital preservation point of view, where they will look at a FedEx building that has 10 years left on the lease, where FedEx is your tenant. They're in the whole building. They take care of the roof, the foundation, the load-bearing walls. They pay the property tax, the insurance, and the maintenance as part of a triple net or absolute net lease. And they may only pay 5% as a yield, unleveraged, on the lease that's in place, but that has built-in increases of 1 or 2% every year for the length of the lease. And so if you're at that point in time where you're more interested in capital preservation and tax advantages, then you don't have to deal with tenants. Where's my check? Hey, you're moving out. Oh, I've got construction to do. What contractor am I going to use? Oh, there's a leak in the roof. We had a flood because of the rain, right? Those are all things that you can manage successfully if you're willing to trade your time to try and increase your cash flow. But if you are not prepared to do that or not willing to do that, then you look for less tenants, you look for a longer lease term, increased credit, and then less management. And so I think it's natural to start at one end, and as the years go by, oftentimes people end up on that end of the scale, or if they have less experience managing it, they'll start in the middle and work that way down that spectrum.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And tax-wise, the primary mechanism that enables that kind of transition from property to property is the 1031 exchange that you mentioned a couple times. We follow tax policy a fair amount at my firm, and I obviously as part of my job, and I talk about it a little bit here on the podcast. And President Biden's been pretty transparent throughout the years regarding his distaste for the 1031 exchange. And my understanding of all this is that, he has his campaign promises and the stuff that he wants to do with the tax code, which is a little bit lower priority right now than the coronavirus stuff, all the other parts of the job. But at some point, he is going to get around to tax legislation. And so he communicates his instructions or wishes or whatever to Congress, and then it bounces around. They go back and forth, and you have the power struggle, and then we come out with a bill that gets voted on and vetoed or approved, I guess. What are your thoughts on the sanctity of the 1031 exchange? Do you see that going away anytime soon?
What a tough situation to be in. It seems like it's unlikely to be passable, but I feel like this is not the first time that it's been in the crosshairs, and it's more a matter of looking for as many different places where you can raise revenue, and that is one of them. So as you go around and think of all the different tax advantages that are out there, which ones can you close, or what other increases in revenue can you create or can you increase? My general thought is that it continues to be prioritized low enough where it makes it to the next year or to the next administration. But it is a big enough topic where if you had tens of millions of dollars tied up there and you felt like this had a very realistic and probable expectation of being passed, what would you do about it, right? And so would there be a slew of activity to get into whatever your lifetime assets are going to be? Or you would start to think your time horizon would change and you would make moves to adjust all your assets to that time horizon. So I feel like there are a lot of people that are contemplating it. and a lot of people that are following it. And some people are making adjustments and moves to try and hedge against it. But that would have such a monumental impact because there are so many people that benefit from that and have that be like a very large very large role in their investment, that it seems like that's so many of people out there that there's enough to have a critical mass to prevent that from ever making it to the top. But it would have huge ramifications.
Yeah, it's. I like the way you phrased it earlier. It seems like it's in the crosshairs pretty frequently, but it also seems to me like it's one of those things that you put on your agenda, knowing that it's going to be on the chopping block just for gamesmanship purposes, And if you know that you have 10 things you want to do, you're only going to get 6 of them. Well, you might as well add some bullet points that are not likely to get passed in the first place to
It's
feed
kind
the
of
other
like
side.
it's like a property tax increase.
Yeah.
Are there more people that own property that would be affected by that? Are there more people that don't own that would would benefit by the raise in revenues and whatever impacts that would have in new like a community assets or new things being built in the area? Right. I find in general, there's more people that vote than there are that own property. Right. And so if you can be voting on something that doesn't affect you, and that's an increase in revenue, that's not a decrease to revenue to you, that's I feel like that's why it's scary, though, every time that it makes it onto the list. That could that be something that there's enough people on that say, you know what? Yeah, let's go for that. It's disheartening, but I feel like it's so hard to know if that's ever going to make it to the top.
Yeah, you're right. Well, you are a busy man. I know you have a lot to do this week, and I don't want to keep you for too long. What have we missed?
The only other thing I would think of is for the people that are looking just as pure investors. And from a tax perspective, there's cost segregation is something that a lot of investors utilize, and that's how you depreciate your assets and your properties. And so if you are looking at an alternative to the normal depreciation schedule for commercial assets, then you can work through a cost segregation study that takes each component piece of the property and figures out what its appropriate amortization schedule should be. And so that can be anything from the driveway to the roof to the electrical conduit to the carpet to the office and to the air conditioners. And so that's another way for investors to be able to utilize property to help them with their tax liability. And to play that back into the 1031, if you are utilizing that, then you're more likely to need to exchange more often because you would need to trade up into a larger property to have a larger depreciation schedule. And so that's another common tool that's available and very commonplace that would also be affected as a result.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do those cost segregation studies typically run on mid-size industrial buildings you're seeing?
Yeah, I would guess like $5,000 to $10,000. They take a couple of months, and it's a partnership between an accountant and an engineer. And so the engineer's part is to make sure that you visit the site and you identify and categorize everything correctly, all the component pieces of the building. And then it's the accountant who will help you with the actual filing and the paperwork and the calculations and figuring out how that fits into your overall tax strategy. And but I generally find that you want to also be cognizant of your loan maturity and your investment horizon so that you can you now have another schedule that has another time horizon that you need to factor into your investments. So that's something that's exciting and available and pretty widespread, but comes with its own considerations and it's kind of its own discussion. Yeah, it's called industrial intelligence. and came out in April 27th. And I took the view of the business owner. Since that's 50% of the work that I do, I'm used to being one of the trusted advisors. So I tried to figure out what was most valued by clients and business owners and what are their biggest challenges that I have experienced, and then try and come up with some kind of user's manual for it or some kind of guide. And I found that's helpful then for the business owner and the client themselves. It's also helpful for their operations person or their accountant or their attorney to also glean some more information to help guide and counsel them. And it's been a lot of fun to interview all of the top like vendors and other companies and consultants that help business owners. And I found a lot of business owners, they feel like they're on their own. And so there's so many resources and potential team members and collaborators out there that it was good to put that all into one place so that if they're dealing with a challenge or a specific point in time, they could have another resource that they could look to and say, got it. Okay, this is how it fits into the big picture. This is who could help me with it, and this is how it might help. And there could be a second one about investing, next year, but I think that's still more of an idea because the amount of time and effort it takes to put it together it's significant enough where I think you've got to really set the intention and be prepared for it.
Yeah, good on you for getting out the first one. That's a huge project. I mean, that's. I hope it's going well. How are sales so far? You just released it in April, you said.
Yeah, great. It's interesting to find out that for me, if I didn't sell a single one, but I could give it to all my clients and all my prospective clients, that would be a win in my book. But what I found is it not only does it resonate with the business owners, it resonates with a lot of the service providers and a lot of other brokers, but it's also surprisingly resonated so well with the institutional investment community that owns these types of assets to get a better understanding into who are my customers and my clients and my tenants and what challenges are they facing and how can we best accommodate them and help them in the way that we manage the asset or in the improvements that we do to our properties. And how do we train our incoming analysts and underwriters and asset managers and give them a primer and help with their own education and professional development? So it's been interesting to see that it resonates with a lot more people than just who I had in mind that I'm used to working with. So that's been great to get feedback and see who it's been helping.
Well, I'm sure that just means you've got a lot of good stuff to say, and that's a good thing. Probably means you need to come out with another book.
No doubt.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, for joining us. This has been really enlightening from my perspective. I know a lot of people are going through this, as you just mentioned, with the distribution of your book. I'm sure that the audience here will get a lot from it, and I thank you for your time. This has really been great.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements. And feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.